Welcome back to the Rink Rap Podcast. I am Jim Cerny. We are brought to you by Forever Blueshirts, joined today by Greg Wyshynski of ESPN. See your name back there. You got you're promoting your X account and everything. I like that. It's very smooth. This is a guy that does a lot of interviews, so that's easy promotion behind you. You're a smart guy.
That's mostly for when I was on TV. Like, I used to do or I still do the ESPN bet show. I pop on The Point now and again. And, I'm like, if I'm blasting out this backdrop to, a good number of people, I might as well just try to get something out of it. So I got my book over my shoulder and all this other stuff too. So, you got always be selling, the way you got to work it.
Exactly. And by the way, you and I may be the only two media people in the New York tri-state area, not at Citi Field right now for the Juan Soto coronation that is taking place in Queens. So we're going to sit here. We're going to dissect all that ails Aaron Rodgers and the New York. Oh, wait, that's
well,
totally
let me talk about
separate.
Soto for a second. Cause like as a Mets fan, it's a new feeling to have an ownership that's so flush with cash that you actually can maybe outbid, depending on who you talk to, or at least match what the Yankees are offering a free agent. But then like at the end of the day, you're still a Mets fan, which means your thoughts immediately go to, this guy's going to put on the uniform. All the talent is going to drain from his body, and he's going to be Bobby Bonilla Part 2. It's like, right. You can never be happy as a Mets fan, even when you should be the happiest.
Right. And totally waiting. Like, if you listen to sports radio or whatever, which I do, I have it on background while I'm working during the day, and just the angst amongst the Mets, they cannot enjoy. And I'm a huge Mets fan, born in Queens, born and raised, grew up at Shea. I am dyed in the wool Mets all the way, Mets and Jets. And I mean, I'm like, just enjoy the day. This is a good day. This has never, ever happened. This is a good day. But it's like, no, what are they going to do? We don't have the pitching.
But you know what that is. Like, Mets fans are allergic to expectations. We're the happiest when there are none. That's why this season was great. Like before the season, it's going to be a transition year until we open up all this money and then try to sign Soto. And then the most beautiful thing happened, which is that they all of a sudden became a contender. And now Grimace is here. And all of this stuff happens. And we're the happiest when it comes out of nowhere. That's why 86 is kind of an outlier, because they were expected to win. But like, we're the happiest when it's 69. We're the happiest when it's, 73. We're the happiest when it's last year, when magic happens and we don't expect it. But the minute we're supposed to expect it, that's when our sphincters clench up. We get very, very antsy about it.
Yeah. And not to belabor the Mets point, but you're so spot on, because to me, as a kid growing up, one of the most special seasons that I had, I was a little bit older than a kid. I was past my little fandom. I was a little bit older and understood more. But 1984, greatest year. Here come all the kids. Here's this cool manager. He basically says, screw you to the GM, whatever the GM wants. He's screw you. And, we got all these great kids. They were rolling them out one after the other. I'm like, this is great. And I'm not saying 86 wasn't great, but then the angst of 87 and the angst of 88 and 89, right? They should have won multiple World Series, and instead they just won the one. But 84 is always, that was the special year. I'm like, oh my God, all these years, all this torture I've been putting myself through. Now it's bearing fruit. It's paying off,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So anyway, but we'll segue back into hockey. When you watch the New York Rangers, okay, I'm putting on Greg Wyshynski shoes right here. When Greg Wyshynski, watches the New York Rangers, I see what? What do you see?
First of all, apologies for the ratty pair of Chuck Taylors that you're wearing if you're putting on Greg Wyshynski shoes. I see a team that can't defend. And there's been times in the past few seasons that, whether it was Laviolette or Gallant, where they would start off kind of analytically bad defensively and get a little bit better. I don't quite see it this year getting better. This is a team that seems to not be able to commit to play defense at a suitable level at 5-on-5 in front of Igor. They give up way too many odd man rushes the other way. They don't win enough puck battles. It's systemic with this team. And it leads to games like the one against the Seattle Kraken recently, where, that's a game the Rangers should be able to close out, and they didn't. And then things got out of hand, and they lost to a team that they should beat on home ice. So that's one thing I see from a systemic standpoint, and that, you could say leads back to either the effort of the players or what the coach is coaching. And maybe those two things are kind of intertwined because, the other thing about this team right now is the way that some of the more dependable players in the lineup are playing. And it's not all that well. And, when you're around the team, you hear things, how happy are some of the veteran guys with Laviolette? Not really. Is the message sort of fading on them? And he is a coach who, of course, usually comes in throwing 110, and then the message kind of starts to wane in subsequent seasons. So I know that, inherently there's a lot of people that don't believe that Laviolette's the problem. He may not necessarily be the problem, but when you've traded your captain, when you've tried to scare the team straight by, leaking the name of another beloved veteran who could be traded, and you're not getting any results from that necessarily, then you have to kind of wonder what the next shoe is going to be that drops, and it could be the coach.
Yeah, but who's the replacement out there? Is it Joel Quenneville? Is that it? We got to keep climbing the ladder on the level of the coaches. Is that the guy that's going to hold this team's interest for more than 82 games? Because listen, I get it. I understood the Gallant firing, at the time. I got that. And then there was great buy-in to Laviolette last year. I just don't, and I know you said there's, some people out there who say, well, it's not really, this isn't really on Laviolette. I'm kind of one of those people. I mean, everybody takes their share of blame here. I don't think he's the biggest issue with this group. I really think it's much more in the locker room, and it's more personnel. And I'm not saying there isn't talent there, but I think it's more the inner workings of the personnel than it is the head coach.
Yeah, and the issue is like you'd throw it to like Phil Housley if you fired him now, probably as an interim coach. I mean, Quenneville was the guy that they wanted before they even hired Laviolette. But I think at the time, the entanglements of the former Blackhawks employees and the NHL was a little bit more tangled than it is now, where obviously they've been cleared. No, I mean, I struggle with it because I do think ultimately I fall on the side of construction versus coaching as far as being the biggest problem with this team. But I think that Chris Drury has already shown that he believes the roster he's put together is better than it should be, better than it's showing right now. And if you believe in your personnel, then ultimately you believe that at some point maybe someone else can get more out of that personnel than is getting out of them right now. Or, like the memo that was sent to 31 other general managers saying, hey, we're open for business, and putting Trouba's name out there and putting Chris Kreider's name out there, maybe a signal that he isn't enamored with the roster, and that, he needs to begin the process of clearing out space to do what he really wants to do next summer. I know my colleague Emily Kaplan has talked about the Rangers going big game hunting. I mean, that's what the Rangers do, right? So not a surprise there with guys like Mikko Rantanen and, Mitch Marner and others that could become available next summer. But, it could easily be Chris Drury having a better, more realistic picture of this roster than we're giving him credit for, and trying to get his ducks in a row now for whatever this is going to look like next season.
Yeah, and I'd argue really that may have been taking place during the summer. Listen, he tried to move Jacob Trouba. He tried to clear that $8 million annual, the AAV off the books, because ostensibly, there was something else, something bigger and better he wanted to do. And I was kind of reminiscing watching you and Jeff, together on his latest show on Daily Faceoff the other day. And other than being taken back in time, of course, seeing you two together, I heard you guys talking about that, Drury didn't do enough during the past offseason. Yeah. And I agree. And Riley Smith certainly wasn't the answer. And not only Riley Smith, but Riley Smith on the cheap, because Penguins are paying half that contract and everything. Totally agree. But there was, I think, an understanding that something had to be done. And I don't think Drury was happy going into the season without making some sort of bigger move. And I think that's, listen, he tried. He wasn't popular in the room, but, he cut $3+ million a year off by waiving Barclay Goodrow. He tried to trade Jacob Trouba. It didn't work, but they were so up against the cap. Listen, I'm always trying to figure out, I'm no jury apologist, but I'm not sure what else, he could have done, unless maybe you found a taker for Chris Kreider or, something of that nature during the off season. But I'm not sure what else he could have done at that time when he got, ran into the stone wall of Trouba, because they were right smack up against the cap.
Yeah. And thanks for mentioning me and Merrick. We're doing our old Merrick versus Wyshynski show every Tuesday on Daily Face Off. It's good to chat with my boy again on a weekly basis, and also for like an hour, which is really the magical part of our dumb podcast, is having the real estate to take it in bizarre places. But the one thing that we talked about with regard to the Rangers offseason, and you're right. I mean, like, we just got done, praising Steve Cohen for having the foresight to, declare that they wanted to try to get Juan Soto, and then not like ruining his financial situation during the season, and then staying on target and getting that the next summer, knowing what the full plan was going to be. And the full plan could easily have been, we're not going to break the bank for anybody. Like, we do respect his Zibanejad and Kreider, but we're not going to break the bank to get you a winger, because we have Mikko Rantanen in mind, a year later. Like, it could easily be a longer game than we're giving Drury credit for. But if it is, the players don't know that. And I think that was the biggest takeaway for me in my conversation with Jeff this week was, the Goudreau thing, the way that Trouba was treated in the summer, basically just slicing his legs out from under him as far as being team captain, because he knows he's a lame duck. And that invades the room. Having Kreider's name in the memo, like, all this stuff adds up, and certainly does not help the vibes or the enthusiasm in that dressing room. And so there is sort of that ancillary problem that occurs if you're a general manager, where you're trying to put in the work, you're trying to make the team better, you're trying to get your cap in order for what maybe comes next, but in the present, it's really messing with your boys' minds, and it's really not producing any good hockey on the ice.
So Jacob Trouba gets traded finally. And, it was that was a messy, weird day too, but it happens. And, I give credit to him, to Drury. He got rid of the full AAV. He got a depth defenseman back. He got a little something back. Okay, all good. Except you still need to replace Jacob Trouba. like Victor Mancini. Listen, I think he's going to be part of the future as a bottom four defenseman, probably a third pair guy. But you look at his metrics, he's not quite NHL ready in my book right now. Not on an everyday basis. But that's right now who's replaced Jacob Trouba in the lineup. So that's a step back. And then, K'Andre Miller doesn't play the third period against the Buffalo Sabres. Upper body injury. We won't know until tomorrow or maybe the day after exactly where he stands. But a not very good defense core anyway you've lost 20 minutes a night, and you're maybe your best penalty killer among defensemen in Trouba. And now you lost another 21 plus minutes a night in K'Andre Miller, a guy who often this year has played on the top pair with Adam Fox. There's nothing below. Connor Mackey's not the answer. Shocker. Chad Ruhwedel's not the answer. Matthew Robertson's not the answer. There are no answers below. So, if Miller is going to miss some time, they are in deep doo-doo, for a stretch. So I throw this in your lap. I know you like playing GM. What the heck do you do? Even just to replace Trouba. Now, they may be thinking closer to the deadline. Maybe they make a move there. But got to replace Trouba in my book. And now, Miller's out for a little bit. What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, and you also have a goalie in Igor Shesterkin, who's, legs are probably wobbling right now from having propped up this team for as long as he has this year. Like, on top of all the odd man Russians he's seeing now, he's playing behind a blue line with Chad Ruhwedel playing, top 4 minutes. I mean, we did an NHL trade tiers board this week on ESPN, compiled from conversations I've had around the league, and also, getting input from Emily Kaplan and from Kevin Weeks. And the one thing that's clear is that there is a glut of defensemen available, that many of them have expiring contracts. It's just a matter of picking up the phone and trying to, leverage a price now ahead of the deadline from some of these teams that, may or may not still be in the hunt. So, I mean, the good news is that if and when they do want to have a short-term Band-Aid to put on the defense core without Jacob Trouba there, I think they can find it, and they won't have to pay an arm and a leg for it either, based on how many defensemen are going to be available. The interesting thing about the defense core, though, and I referenced Kevin Weeks before, he said that he's heard Keandre Miller's name out there as far as being in the trade market, which is really surprising. I mean, not a complete shock when you have somebody who's due a huge payday that maybe teams are just doing their due diligence to see his availability. But when you think about that, when you think about Lindgren needing a new contract, when you think about the Trouba getting traded, like there's every possibility that, it's like when you're playing video poker and you hold the ace and then reshuffle all the other cards. Like it could be Adam Fox is there and Schneider's there probably too, but then everybody else is sort of like reshuffled after the season, depending on what they want to do contractually with some of them and what the trade market looks like.
Yeah, and great points. I mean, you basically led right into what I was going to talk about, that, at one point, probably about a year or two ago, I thought, boy, Keandre Miller, he is going to be a huge part of the future of this organization. Wow. He's stepped in as a young guy, big, strong, offensively gifted, solid defensively. And then it's like he hit a plateau at age 22, 23. And it's stunning that it just ended. And I'm not saying he's bad. He's not bad. Like Ranger fans want to crucify him. He's not bad, but he's an RFA with arbitration rights at the end of the year. So, is he a $5 million defenseman in that scenario? If you're Drury, I'm going to pay $5 million for this. I don't think so. So do you get proactive there? And then there's, then you got Ryan Lindgren, who you touched on, UFA, a guy who everybody in the business, anybody you speak to in the business believes, he's not going to age well.
No,
just the way he plays, his size, right?
He hasn't aged well now. Like his body is usually being kept together by Scotch tape and prayers in the playoffs. And while he's a really, I think he's a really effective defensive defenseman when he's in the lineup, but the in the lineup is not parenthetical. Like that's the whole ball game with him, and you can't depend on him being healthy.
Right. But even this year, I'd argue there's been a regression in his play too.
Sure.
And I know he missed the first, it was only 5 games, but it was the jaw injury. He was playing with the fishbowl on his face and everything, but he hasn't been the same guy. He hasn't found that level yet.
You referenced it before. I mean, there's a reason why Miller's played up with Fox. Like, they one probably trying to test it out to see if they can, mesh well together, which would then help justify paying Keandre after the season, but also because Lindgren wasn't playing all that well, and you want to do right by your best defenseman.
So here's the thing. Okay, we say he's got to replace Trouba. I mean, we'll see the Miller situation. I think if they traded him, I think it would be an off-season thing. I don't think they can create another hole here, assuming that that his upper body injury isn't anything major. So that said, probably need another defenseman, but you really need an elite top 6 winger, don't you? So all of a sudden we're back to the cap question again. How does Chris Drury manage this? By the time we get closer to the trade deadline.
Yeah. And that's why ultimately the answer might be he doesn't. They roll with what they have. And then they try to augment it in the offseason. I mean, listen, if it gets to a point where the Colorado Avalanche don't want to give Mikko Rantanen the amount of money he thinks he deserves, and that his camp thinks he deserves, and keep in mind that Rantanen shares an agent with Leon Draisaitl, who just reset the market for centers last summer. And so, that could easily be the number they're looking at, like 14 million against the cap, which is a lot. If he hits the market, the Rangers are going to be first in line, hat in hand. Like they'll be ready for it. And you're talking about like, oh geez, how are we going to find the next, Mats Zuccarello for Kreider and Zibanejad? Well, if Mikko Rantanen's walking through that door, and all of a sudden he is the right wing of their dreams. I mean, that changes the math for everything. So it could easily be that Drury slapped the band-aid on the problem. Clearly, Riley Smith is not the long-term solution, and clearly Riley Smith isn't even maybe in some ways the short-term solution, based on what Zibanejad has been pretty candid about in looking for as far as a winger for them. I don't think Riley Smith is really that. But if the ultimate solution is that they're going to go and spend a ton of money on a winger in the next offseason, then maybe, again, we were just sort of shortchanging Chris Drury's long-term planning here.
Right. So I'm glad we're talking about forwards here. Larry Brooks was on Spittin' Chicklets earlier this week. Now, if there is ever
what a nightmare blunt rotation that is. Holy smokes.
That is a murderer's row right there. And see, I can tell you missed it because you didn't know. So got Larry on Spittin' Chicklets with those characters, and Sean Avery was on as well. So there's there you go. There's the lineup. There's 1 through 4 in the lineup.
I mean, I'm a pretty amenable guy. Like, if you invite me to a function, I'm probably going to attend, and you may have just unlocked something for me as far as the place I'd least like to be in life may have been in that quartet. Due respect to Biz.
Yeah. So there is that quartet. They did have a podcast this week. Brooksy talked a lot about Mika Zibanejad, and to his credit, he hit on some really good points, I thought, with Mika about just how fragile his confidence is and how he's so, man, when he's criticized, it just doesn't go well for him. Like, some guys just play, yeah, who cares? Who cares what the media says? All right, the fans are booing, who gives a crap? But with Mika, he takes all this stuff to heart, and it just weighs him down. I thought he made some really good points with that. So a question here, and we may not have the answer to it, but I'll throw it out to you. At Richie Isaac sends us in a question and says, well, Brooksy is right about Zibanejad's troubles and kind of his personality and what have you. Could it be that Gerard Gallant did a better job pumping his tires than Peter Laviolette does? Does he need that special coaxing or whatever? So you've been around Mika a little bit, kind of your thoughts about his personality, the incredible troubles he's had this year. And I know he's almost a point a game player, but I'd argue he might be the biggest issue that they have out there this season.
Yeah.
So you kind of your thoughts about him, but also if you have any insight into maybe how he had been treated before, or difference in how he's treated, or if that even matters.
Well, again, the illusion that they've made is the illusion I made earlier this podcast rather, which is the notion of the veterans aren't happy playing for Laviolette. And that could easily be the juxtaposition between a guy who's more of a taskmaster versus the players coach that they had previous in Gerard Gallant, who I think that they all really liked. And so, you know this better than anybody. Like the way hockey works is you get a players guy, and then you get to a certain point, and then you're not happy with the success the team has. So then you bring in, the drill sergeant. You bring in, father of the year, and then you bring in Full Metal Jacket. It's been like this in the NHL for my entire life. And so maybe there are players in the team that responded better to a Gallant type than they do to a Laviolette type. And it's possible that is kind of playing out statistically and on the ice.
So final one for you, and I know you got to run, and I appreciate your time today, Craig. Do the Rangers pull out of this in a real positive way? There's still 50 odd games to go I guess 50 games to go in their season, thereabouts. Or no, more than that. I can't even count. 50 odd games to go. So there's a lot of time between now and the playoffs, and there'll be the trade deadline and what have you. Do you think this team there's so much talent on this team. Is it just natural due course at some point that they kind of get back to being at least a closer facsimile to being the New York Rangers, and they pull out of this and they're a playoff team, and we'll see where they go from there? Or are there really bigger issues here? Because I'd argue that they played maybe a small handful on one hand amount of 60-minute efforts this season. And to me, that is massively concerning. And this isn't just about going 3-8-0 in their last 11. To me, it's been almost the entire season so far. So I guess kind of just put a bow on it. Your thoughts on do they pull out of this because they just have the talent to do it? And B, is it a sooner or later thing?
Well, it's kind of a combination of things. I mean, obviously, like they're not. I don't think they're a cup contender. I think they've showed their stripes there as far as having systemic defensive problems, the lineup not being deep enough, guys underperforming. We've been very, very like doom and gloom, but there are some bright spots. I mean, Panarin's played great. I think Lafreniere is going to end up being a point per game player. Fox has played well. There's certainly some things about this team you can be pretty happy about. And I think with Igor back there, they can overcome a lot of the systemic problems that they have in the lineup. I think Drury will augment them, but not to the point of costing them against what they could do next summer or in the future. At some point, the holy trinity on this team, the foundation on which you build around is going to be Lafreniere, Fox, and Igor. And that's a pretty good starting point, in my opinion. So the other thing about this too that we didn't talk about is the East. And so while the Rangers are in a spiral, they're not really having to strain their neck looking over their shoulder all that much. Like the Islanders aren't really good. And then all those teams in the Atlantic that we expect to pop haven't. Ottawa, Detroit, Buffalo. Montreal is lingering, but ultimately not good enough to make a playoff spot. The Blue Jackets are better than expected, but they're not going to be a playoff team. Same probably with the Flyers. And we saw what Pittsburgh is the other night against the Rangers. So if, at the end of the day, it's as it is, usually Florida, Toronto, Tampa, Boston, and then Carolina and Washington's now going to apparently be a playoff team in perpetuity.
That's the big surprise.
And the Devils look great on the nights when they don't look terrible. So when you look at all that math, what it comes out to is there's, 2 wild card spots. The Rangers, Boston, and Team X are probably going to go for them. And at the end of the day, the Rangers are probably better than Boston and probably better than Team X. So they're still going to be a playoff team, but I don't think they're going to be a contender for the Cup.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is they could still easily finish in the top 3 or top 2 in the division too. But
sure,
Carolina and Jersey have certainly been more consistently much better than the Rangers, but they have so many games in hand on everybody too in that division. Yeah. All of a sudden, you string together, you knock off a Buffalo and. I was going to say Chicago, but maybe knock off Chicago, but
they aren't necessarily picking up all the points they should be. But Carolina's got the goaltending issues. The Devils are, Jekyll and Hyde. They're even within a single game, like the Toronto game earlier this week, where for the most of that game they look like they've already won the Cup, and then Markstrom gets up a soft goal, and then they lose in overtime. I mean, they're a freaky little team like that, but they've already shown that they're clearly going to be a playoff team, I think. But again, when you stack up the East, the Rangers have and this certainly isn't the issue in the West, but the Rangers have the luxury of not really being not really figuring themselves out right now and being kind of an average or mediocre team because there isn't anybody really pounding down the door in the Eastern Conference to usurp them at this point.
Right. And for and I'll just, my putting a bow on it is, if I'm Drury and the coach and the organization, I don't even know that Jim Dolan knows the Rangers exist, but we'll throw him into the mix too. I'd be much more concerned if it was February or March than it is here in December too. I think that's the other part of this. There's still time for them to pull out of it, but it has been prolonged and it has been ugly, to say the least.
I guess we'll find out if Jim Dolan's paying attention to the Rangers if Quenneville's the coach by the end of the week.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very valid point. So well said, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us today. Definitely want to circle back, a little bit later in the season again, kind of work into your busy schedule there, and then we'll discuss who the next Jets quarterback's going to be.
Oh my God. Well, that's a whole nother show, isn't it? But yeah, appreciate it. And happy holidays to everybody who's watching, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Greg.
Anytime.